Wednesday, June 6, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. I'm going to talk about the Bilderberg group today and the Italian situation. It seems to be getting a little worse. Italian yields are going back up. And also a story about Putin, President Putin of Russia. He's visiting Austria, or at least he was yesterday. I'm not sure if he's still there today. But in an interview with an Austrian journalist, he mentioned George Soros. And I'll try to put those two, Bilderberg, Putin, the European government bond crisis all together, and maybe do a bit of speculation. And before that, of course, I'll look at the markets. It's just before 9 o'clock a.m. Billy's here today. I had to wake him up. Some of you have been missing him. He's getting a little older, so he sleeps in a little more at the moment. So let's have a look at what we're doing here. And I'll also look at RBS, the bank that, the UK bank that almost brought the whole system down here in the UK, and probably also the whole fiat money system, had to be bailed out by the government. Everything had to be backstopped here in the UK. And the government bought loads of shares, and what is still the biggest owner in the bank. So let's go see what the market's doing before. Spot gold 12.98, up $2. Range has been 12.96 to 1300 basically. So that 13, we got up above 1300 yesterday, but right now seems like gold and silver are being kept under the lid of the pressure cooker, I would say. Silver 1656, up 8, so up 0.5%. The Dow is up 88 at 24,890. Up 1/3%. S&P up 5 or 0.2%. NASDAQ 100 futures 7181. That's up 0.2%. I saw the NASDAQ yesterday. The composite made a record high. So there you go. Things are still very choppy in the markets, very uncertain. Currency-wise, we had a fairly good move up from by the pound, British pound. Yesterday we had like a service survey. I think it was a service PMI that was higher than expected. And one thing about these PMI surveys, they're only surveys. They're people surveyed, purchasing managers are surveyed, and they give their what they think is happening. So it's not real data taken. It's not real data like industrial production or retail sales. It's just a survey. But the market reacted to that. The pound went from like 133.20 to all the way to 134. And this morning we're up higher a little bit. The euro is up 40 pips or 1/3%, 117.58, and the dollar is actually up against the yen 1/4%, at 110. So strange, because now let's have a look at the Italian yields. We're back up to 291, almost back up to 3%. I mean, a couple of days ago we got back below 250, and now it's 291. It's up 12. Yesterday it went up again. So we're almost back up to that 3% level. And it's funny that actually the German yield today is up 4 basis points. So things are starting to look interesting. And the US 10-year is up almost back up to 3%, is at 294. What about the UK? I mean, some people have been asking me about the UK yield curve. Well, the 2-year gilt, for example, is at 0.68%, so very low, even though inflation here in the UK or the cost of living is rising. I would say more like 4 or 5%. So the comment by Lenin that the best way to destroy the middle class, or the bourgeoisie as he called it, was to destroy their money. So that's what they're doing here in the UK. Bank of England still got the short term, their rate at 0.5%. People are being screwed, the general public, of course. 3% inflation plus or debasement plus a year. No wonder the pound is going south generally. So yeah, 0.68, the 2-year yield, that's gone up 60 basis points in 1 year. The 10-year yield is at 132. That's up 4 today, and it's gone up 34 basis points in the last year. The 5-year yield is at 104. That's gone up 60. Yeah, so it looks like the 2 and the 5 are going up quicker than the 10, but we're not completely flat yet. We've still got a long way to go, and I think maybe that's why the Bank of England doesn't want to raise rates, or they're putting it off so much, because the banks depend on this spread. The steeper the curve is, the better it is for the banks, because they borrow short term to lend long term, and it keeps the credit boom going. So that's what's happening in the UK. The other thing I heard very interesting from the UK is anecdotal evidence from one of my viewers who lives in Leigh-on-Sea. Is it Leigh-on-Sea? Yeah, I think it's in Essex. It's like a kind of a suburban part of Greater London, Essex. A lot of people that live around there work in the city. They take the train in the morning, and he said he's put his house up for sale and he hasn't had a viewer in a month. Usually when you put a house up for sale here in the UK, if the market is doing well, you're going to get a few viewers in the first week. And he said there's other houses in the street that about 7 other people who are trying to sell their houses and no one's coming to view them. So that's a bad sign. And that's despite the fact that the 10-year yield has gone down about 8 basis points in the last month. And the 10-year yield is what's used by mortgage companies to set the rates. So that's what's going on there. What's happening in Italy? Well, the prime minister of the populist government, he won a vote in the House, his first confidence vote, and today he's got his first his confidence vote in the Senate, and yeah, and the markets are nervous. The speech that he made yesterday, I didn't really listen to it. From what I read, it was very pro populist, so people are concerned. And so, what about Bilderberg? There's a couple of videos I recommend, and I'm going to put them up in the cards above and in the description. One is by Luke Radowski of We Are Change, flying to Bilderberg in a private jet. I put that one on. And the other one that I actually recommend more, I think it's more detailed, is from Press for Truth, a Canadian guy. Forgot his name, but he's been going to Bilderberg for years, and he talks about who's going there. So Bilderberg meeting is basically like the globalists or the New World Order's private, how can I say, annual meeting, and it's behind closed doors. They invite the most important people in all fields: government, finance, media, academia, from politics, and they keep very quiet. The media actually doesn't come, the mainstream media doesn't come to report on it. But over the years, the alternative has kind of pushed it and brought it to the attention of people that there is this meeting. And they conduct a meeting under this rule called Chatham House rules. What is Chatham House? Well, Chatham House is where the Royal Institute for International Affairs in London is based. Central London, it's at Chatham House. And basically, it's like, well, whatever we talk about in here, you keep it private. They do publish stuff for public consumption, but it's they keep everything private. So is it right that elected officials meet in private? I don't think so. So they started out in 1954, and I think the Bilderberg Hotel in Holland, the guy behind it was the husband of the Queen of Holland, who was a former Nazi officer. I think it was Prince, what was his name? Prince Bernhard, German Nazi officer, SS officer. He started it out. Henry Kissinger has been going to those meetings for decades. David Rockefeller used to go to them. He passed away, of course, I think a few months ago. The Rothschilds go to these meetings. So, interesting that Press for Truth, he's got all the agenda and the people who are going. So they're starting to bring out a website, the Bilderberg, just to keep people like from thinking of but they're not, they don't publicize, of course, their meetings and what they really say. But the people who are going to be there, really interesting. Mark Carney, he's the governor of the Bank of England. Why is he there? Stanley Fischer, he resigned, I think, last year. He was the right-hand man for Janet Yellen. Sorry, so he was the deputy governor of the Federal Reserve, or the vice chairman of the Federal Reserve. So that's interesting, and they've got Henry Kissinger going again. The guy's still going, Henry Kissinger. And this interview, the Putin interview, this is really interesting, and I'll put the link below to the story. Zero Hedge, wrote this story. I'd actually seen this video yesterday, and it says, in heated interview, Putin says, ask the State Department about Soros. And what's that about? Well, the Austrian interviewer was giving him a really hard time. He was saying, people are saying that Russia interfered in the U.S. 2016 elections. They said that one of the guys is Putin's chef. Putin said, well, yeah, this guy's a friend of mine. He owns a restaurant in St. Petersburg. I do go there to eat. But does that mean that someone owning a business, a restaurant, is going to be able to affect the U.S. elections? And then he says, why don't you ask the State Department about George Soros? I have a lot of people in the U.S. that I know that are saying that George Soros is a private individual. And he says, and Putin goes on to say, George Soros does a lot of things in different countries. He tries to influence elections everywhere. The other day we saw him talking about Italy. And actually Putin says, I've been hearing rumors that Soros is about to make Italy a lot more volatile. So are we going to see Soros break the euro? Wow, that's my speculation for the day. Why do I say that? Well, I don't know if any of you know, George Soros broke the Bank of England in September of 1992. The pound was part of the ERM, exchange rate mechanism, which was the precursor to the euro. Basically, the pound was kept within a band with other European currencies, but that band was broken and the pound collapsed sharply. The Bank of England raised rates to like 15% in one day, from like 10 to 15, and then the next day they cut it back to 10. It was mayhem. I remember it really well because I came to work in London the first week in the beginning of September. Right after the summer, I came here and I started after the bank holiday. And I was working, and this kicked off a few weeks after I got here. And I can remember well, I came from Switzerland. At the time, £1 was about 240 to the Swiss franc, 250. And when you had this crisis, the pound collapsed below 2 to the Swiss franc. George Soros made $1 billion. That's why he became famous, for breaking the Bank of England. So could George Soros be preparing to break the euro? I mean, he comes out and he's very pro-globalist, pro-EU. He's critical of populism, but this is just a front, maybe. You know, he's pro making a lot of money. So can you imagine how much money he would make if he'd be positioned to be able to break the euro? That would be interesting. So that's why we need to keep an eye on what's going on in Italy and RBS as well. Yesterday, the government sold a small percentage of its holdings. It still has about 62%, and they lost over £2 billion pounds on their sale of RBS. But the thing is, the taxpayer is losing a lot more from that because the government has had to backstop hundreds of billions, if not trillions, of debt of all these banks. These are just the shares, but after 10 years, they still own 62%, and they sold it at a 2 billion pounds loss. Is this because they know something's going to happen? Not necessarily, because they sold some 3 years ago. They're just selling out the shares. So that's what's going on this morning. I'd like to inform everyone that I'll be making a live stream tonight, 9 p.m. British Summer Time, which is 4 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Don't know what the subject is going to be. I'm going to, aside from taking your questions, I'll think about something, but there will be a live stream at 9 p.m. today. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on Steemit, DTube, and on Twitter. And I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.